Hey, I'm Nate Savage with GuitarFam.com, where it is our mission to help you play the songs you love with the people that you love. And tell me if this sounds familiar to you in the comments below. Do you have trouble holding on to your pick throughout an entire song? Or do you feel like your upstrokes kind of get caught in the strings? Or do you feel like it's just tough to keep up with the tempo of a song throughout the entire duration of the tune? If those problems sound familiar, I have something for you. It's called the Strumming Technique Checklist, and it can help resolve these issues fairly quickly if you put in the work and get you moving on to what we all really want to do, and that's play through our favorite songs. It can really help take your strumming from something like this to something more like this. And it's important to get this down as soon as possible, because what I don't want for you is to get bored with your strumming, or even worse, get frustrated and be in danger of quitting the guitar altogether. Before we get into the tips on this checklist, I have a resource for you that I think you will find fun and very useful. It's called the Strumming Evaluation Quiz. And all you have to do is go to guitarfam.com/strumming quiz and take it. It's a quick 10-question quiz that will let you know if you're a beginner, advanced beginner, intermediate, or advanced strummer. Once you take the quiz, the results will be emailed to you right away with some details on how you can progress and a few lessons to help you tackle some trouble areas to get you to that next level of strumming. All right, let's go ahead and get into these. Just remember, each one of these may take you an hour to experiment with. It may take you a few weeks. It really depends on how much time you put into it and how much work that one area needs. So let's go ahead and get into this. Number one is experiment with a natural pick grip. A lot of guitar players really obsess about how they hold the pick. And what I like to do, just as a starting kind of baseline, is stick the pick on the table or your knee in front of you and just relax and just reach out and grab the pick as naturally as you can. And that's a good starting position for how you grip your pick. It really ends up working quite well for most guitar players that I do private lessons with. And once you have that natural pick grip, you can play around with the angle, not only this way, like angling it up to the ceiling. You can also angle it down to the floor, because different angles make it easier or harder to get the pick through the strings. So play with the angle this way and this way with a natural pick grip. Also experiment with how you angle the pick like this with a natural pick grip. If you do that, you're probably going to end up landing onto a pick grip that really works for you. That's as natural as I can get it, and I end up pointing it down to the ground sometimes. Sometimes for some parts I point it upwards, and most of the time it's angled a little bit downward like this. Yours might be different, but that's okay. But that's a great place to start if you're new to guitar or just wondering if you're gripping or holding the pick right. Number two is stay relaxed. If you have any excess tension in your fingers, wrist, forearm, shoulder, it's going to show up when you're playing, and it's going to do a couple of things. First off, you're going to have a hard time keeping up with faster tempos of songs if you're really stiff, right? Number two, it might hurt after a while, so be really careful. Just, take a deep breath, relax, get that natural pick grip, and just remember, if you feel any extra tension creeping in as you're playing, exerting yourself, really concentrating, stop, take a deep breath, and start over again. And the best analogy that I've ever heard for this was from Pepe Gambetta, one of my favorite acoustic players. He said, pretend like you have some honey on your finger and a feather is stuck to the honey, and you're just trying to shake it off. If you do that, it's really hard to have any kind of tension, because if you wanted to flick something off your hand, you wouldn't do it like this. You'd kind of whip it, and that's a really good way to think about just basic technique for strumming. Okay, number three kind of goes hand in hand with the last one, and that's don't death grip the pick. When you hold onto the pick really tightly, even if like most of the rest of your arm is pretty relaxed, something happens. That pick, I don't care how thick it is, it becomes more rigid and it becomes harder to get through the strings, and it doesn't give if you're really death gripping the pick. And especially on your upstrokes, we'll talk more about this later. If you really have a hard grip on your pick, it's going to make it really tough to get through the strings, and it's going to sound really clanky. It's not going to sound great. So lighten up on your pick grip. I'm going to tighten it here. It makes it really hard to get through there. So lighten up on your pick grip. And when I do that, the pick kind of gives as I strum through the strings, which is great. So The name of the game here is to find a balance between holding onto the pick loosely enough to where you have some good, really relaxed technique going, but holding onto it tight enough to where it doesn't fly out of your hand. You're just gonna have to experiment and see how loose you can hold onto it before it flies out of your hands, and then find that equilibrium. Nice, relaxed, loose grip, and keeping the pick actually in your fingers. Number 4, don't use just your elbow to strum. I've seen it before. People will grip the pick, lock their wrist, and just use their elbow to strum. Right? And it can work at slower tempos or for things that aren't as complex, but as soon as you start going faster or try to play through a whole set like that, a couple things are going to happen. You're going to have trouble keeping time or keeping up with tempos of faster songs. Right? And it's going to start to hurt right there after a while, probably. So stay injury free. I'm not saying don't use your elbow to strum. I'm saying don't lock your wrists and your fingers and just use your elbow. I use my elbow a little bit, but it's more of a rotational thing like this, right? And you can see my elbow is going a little bit, but it's nice and relaxed. So that's something to think about. Don't just use your elbow to strum and lock everything else. Number 5, experiment with pick thicknesses. The pick that I'm using right now is probably about like 1.2 millimeters. And a lot of newer players will use really thin picks when they're first starting out. And that's kind of okay, but what I would really recommend is using like a medium pick when you're starting out, anywhere from 0.6 to 0.8 millimeters. If you use a really thin pick, it's going to sound really clanky. Number 1, there's going to be a lot of pick noise. And number 2, if you're going to rely on that thin pick to make up for your technique that needs to be developed on your guitar. So you can hold onto a thin pick tighter and you'll be able to get away because the pick bends and lets you get through the strings, right? When you get a thicker pick, like a medium 0.8 millimeter, you have to hold onto the pick lighter, and think about all the tips we've gone over so far. Now I hold onto this pick really light. Since it's a little bit thicker, you can come and flick it out of my hands or out of my fingers when I'm playing. So try this, just get a normal Fender medium pick. I think that's somewhere around 0.8 millimeters, and just try it. You will have to lighten up on your grip if you're used to using a thinner pick, but that's very good for your, developing your technique. And the more you do this, it doesn't matter what thickness of a pick you really use. If you go all the way up to like 1 or 2 millimeters, you can make a really nice sound and get the pick through the strings if you lighten up on your grip and learn how to control the pick. Number 6, try using 2 fingers on your pick. And I mean a couple of things by this. First off, if you're having trouble with the pick sliding around or popping out of your hand, you might want to use 2 fingers. I've seen a lot of guitar players that use 2 fingers when they hold a pick. And it gives you a lot more control. I don't always do that. Sometimes on certain styles of music I will. But one thing, what I do more often is I'll just get my natural pick grip, And this finger will play backup for my pick. So if it starts to move around, I can nudge it back in place or reinforce it like that. Just brushing up against it, because it is going to move around. That pick will move around as you strum. And I make little adjustments like this, keeping the pick in place periodically as I'm strumming. And the second finger plays a big part of it because I can nudge it back in place or reinforce it if it's moving that way. So try a 2-finger grip, or try just using a normal grip, using your second finger as a way to kind of reinforce that pick. And if you don't use a pick at all, that's fine. Just pinch like you're holding a pick, pretend, right? Right? Or you can just use your thumb. Any way you want to do it. You don't have to use a pick, you can still use your fingers. Number 7, don't dig too much of the pick into the strings. If you have a lot of the pick sticking out, or even if you don't, if you choke up on it a lot like I do, but you dig a lot of the pick into the strings, it's going to be harder to get through the strings. So what you might want to do is video yourself, or just look back and only use as much of the tip of the pick as you need to make an appropriate volume for whatever you're playing. If I'm really quiet, I'm going to barely be brushing. If I need to dig in a little bit more, get a little bit louder, I put a little bit more of the pick in, but it's not much of the pick actually hitting the strings. Right? Number 8, mind your upstrokes, and this flows right from the last tip. Oftentimes as guitar players, especially if you're newer to guitar, it can feel like your upstrokes get caught in the strings a lot more than your downstrokes. And there are a couple of things you can do or keep in mind as you're working on your upstrokes to kind of solve this problem. The first thing is, don't feel like you have to hit all 6 strings. Even if you're playing like a G chord, that's a 6-string chord, you know, and you hit all the notes or all the strings on your downstroke, don't feel like you have to go through all 6 strings on your upstroke. Often, I'll hit the top, 3 to 5 strings on an upstroke for a chord that uses 6 strings. So keep that in mind. You don't have to hit all 6 of them. That'll help you. Another thing that will help you harkens back to the last tip. Keep an eye out for how much of the pick you're actually digging into the strings. If you use more than you need to, it's going to get caught in the strings, right? If you back off and use just a little bit of the tip of the pick and play around with the angle of it and use a rotational movement, a really relaxed rotational movement, that'll keep the pick from getting caught in the strings when you use upstrokes. And the last tip I have for the upstrokes is to just isolate them. Take them outside of the context of the strumming pattern or changing chords and just work on them by themselves, and to make a lot faster progress with them. Number 9, and I kind of alluded to this in the last one, I think, and that's look back at your strumming hand. I mean a couple of things by this. You can actually physically just look back to see what's going on, or you could set up a mirror in front of you to see what's going on and kind of check things out, or you can video yourself and watch the video back. And the reason I regularly recommend doing this is because often when we're sitting here practicing, we're concentrating really hard on changing chords, or strumming, all of these things, and we're not doing what we perceive or think we're doing. Getting some kind of objective thing to watch back can really help you be like, oh, I thought I was doing this, but I'm not. Video yourself or get a mirror. And, if you don't have either of those things, just look back and make sure you're kind of implementing all the previous tips that we've gone over here. Tip number 10, and this one is fun and easy, always apply everything you're working on to music or a song. And it's one thing to sit here and, I can be practicing my strumming technique, but it's a completely different thing to apply it in the context of a song, because you have all the other things you have to think about: changing chords, what chord is next, the tempo of the song, what strumming pattern you're using. So always, once you work on your strumming, find a song that works well for the level that you're at and go learn that song and practice it in context. And on that note, I have a musical application for you too. A really great song, if you're just you're a beginner, but you've worked on your strumming a bit, or just in general to apply all the tips we've gone over here, is Knocking on Heaven's Door by Bob Dylan. And that's on guitarfm.com for you, that song with all the resources, the video for the song, teaching you how to play it, the tab or chord chart, and the jam tracks for you too. So that's a very good one to apply all these tips to. Okay, that's it for this video. I do have a PDF for you for the strumming technique checklist. Be sure to download it and just go through them on a regular basis until you feel each one is starting to grow and get better and better. And also, don't forget about the quiz, the strumming evaluation quiz. Just go to guitarfam.com/strumming quiz, fill it out, and if you have any questions on it, you can always email us support@guitarfam.com. See you.